All right, guys, welcome back to the PAWCast. It's another Tuesdays with Caroline.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
Right off the bat, let's go ahead and talk about failure.
When you attempt to do the intro four times,
yes.
and it's like, actually, today's not my day.
Today's not my day.
Yeah, it's all right. We gotta. One of these days, Caroline, we'll get you. You'll nail it. Less thinking, just the words come out. You know. Yeah, you'll get it. You'll get it.
You just what you
This
gotta
is a great
do.
summary of my life.
Yes.
You gotta go back and watch episodes like 1 through 4, and like how. Just listen to those intros, and then it'll make you feel better about yourself because you can watch our growing pains then too.
Yeah, I know.
So you're saying you're just gonna post a compilation one day of all of the intros that Carlo botched?
Oh, the blooper reel has already begun.
Oh, shit.
Yes. Good.
I'm just I'm waiting until the right moment.
Yeah, when it feels, you got to pop it. That's awesome. It's just a running edit list.
Oh yeah,
That's awesome.
it's its own sequence. It's fantastic.
Yeah. See, that's the danger of us like basically recording precast content, you know, where it's like
Yes. I mean, I think it's fantastic, and it'll be a great way to get us a 5-minute worth of laugh when I have 5 minutes worth of stuff. But.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, here we are. Now that we're back, we kind of had a couple different ideas about how to run today, but I think coming off of the last Tuesday with Caroline, we kind of were talking a bit more about failure and what that means, of course, in the workplace, but also in a environment in which there's an education system, not necessarily a reprimand system. Sort of how the expectation is when you have failure, it can kind of propel you forward. While Caroline has not had the opportunity to listen to the podcast that, of course, today we're recording this on a Tuesday. There's a podcast going to come out in a couple of days. In that podcast, we actually, Caroline, just for your reference, we're starting to go through the star chart, and which, of course, I know you know, but just so everyone else here knows, on the education system, of course, we have on pawhealth.net/PAWCast, coming into pages, I think, 3, 4, and 5 is our star chart. We actually have that up in the clinic. So we have them on.
Yeah,
we have them on
I had to look between the pages to watch you do surgery the other day.
Yes. And here I thought it was like, oh, we had posted. Yeah, I had to look at the poster. I'm like, oh, please do tell. How did you use it? Oh, I'm sorry. They were just in your way.
Oh,
Yeah, they were just in my way.
Yeah. What was I doing? Was that the 19 Rock Dog?
Yes,
Yeah,
it was the 19th Rock
19
Dog.
Rock Dog. But yeah, so anyway, so in our actual like formal podcast, not kind of the ones we are having between Tuesdays, Caroline, so on and so forth, is we're actually running through the star chart. So we're starting to talk about the first one. We have actually recorded a previous podcast on performance and potential, but we kind of elaborated upon that performance and potential grid. And I don't know if necessarily you would know it from memory, but basically on the performance and potential grid, we have, the problem child, the star player, the backbone, and the iceberg. And basically what we had talked about in the podcast, or at least identified in the podcast, is that, when we have really high performing employees, basically there's two different ways. Is you have a high performing employee that has a high amount of potential, and in this particular setting, potential is described as one's ability to carry forward tier 4 of our education system, which is professional advancement. So that's either individual advancement or industrial advancement. So industrial advancement is kind of what you and I have been talking about, at least kind of behind the scenes, was where you're going with your career, what kind of an impact do you want to make? That's all sort of the industry type investment, advancement. So that's kind of that star player type category. But we kind of started to talk about in the podcast was how every new employee, and this is not even for potentially as being a new business owner or being a new endeavor or a new just anything new, any new project. Pretty much everyone starts out in this world in which they have relatively low performance, but they have a high amount of potential. So everyone starts out as a problem child, because a problem child is defined as low performance, but really, really high potential. So as we make that swing up into star player, which is high performance, high potential, and we come back into then saying, well, over time, one of the analogies we've used before is, we have the wagons moving west, but some people stay to build a town. That's then essentially what the backbone is. The backbone has a high amount of performance, but not a lot of potential in sort of ongoing industrial advancement. And we split a backbone into two main categories. We said, if you are working in an organization where you have a high amount of performance but a low amount of potential, it comes down to, are you fulfilled? Because if you are in an environment where you have a high amount of performance and a low amount of potential, but you are incredibly fulfilled with what you do, that'll be a job that you'll be happy with for the rest of your life. Whereas if you are in an environment where you have a high amount of performance but you have a low amount of potential because there is a barrier preventing you from becoming a star player, you can't get ahead, you can't get forward, you can't advance yourself, you can't advance the industry, and you are not gaining fulfillment from your job because you can't get into the star player category. You are an unfulfilled backbone. And unfulfilled backbones are essentially what we identified as being sort of the dead-end job, where it's, I can do my job really well. I have a great rapport with clientele and staff, and I have good culture management, but I'm not fulfilled with what I do. So the one last swing is you drop down in your performance and you become an iceberg. You can't get anywhere, so your performance is going to fall off because you're not fulfilled with your job, and then that's just it. You're just collecting a paycheck.
Yeah. I remember us talking about all this because, one, I was really excited that I was in your tier 4 category. I was like, ooh, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah. On our last phone call. Yes. You've been in tier 4 for about 7 months now, only having realized it like a week ago.
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing, I don't remember, but basically, I've had several dead end jobs, so I get it. I feel that.
So let's talk about Ben of course has something to add, but let's talk about it from a few different perspectives, because we kind of talked about that with Katie, as she had been corporate, she had been privately owned, so she actually saw, working in a traditional practice, but working in corporate medicine, that there was sort of similar unnecessary conflict and similar inefficient process for different reasons, but they were both there in both settings. You have also a very unique experience, which I think is very common actually for a lot of kind of young veterinary professionals, is that, let's expand upon that, is you had the experience of being in a quote unquote dead end job where it was more traditional. You couldn't actually become a star player. But then you also have a circumstance where you moved into a privately owned practice who then sold corporate. So you actually have actually a very, like I said, a unique perspective in saying you kind of saw it from a couple of different ways. So I think that is at least worth elaborating on from a conversation standpoint. But more so, I remember one of the very first conversations you and I had was once you found out that your employer was selling corporate. One of your first questions was, well, what do I expect? What now? And essentially my answer to that was yes.
Blown up right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to elaborate that, I mean, certainly, feel free, but I mean, I think to see that swing, from saying new employee to then trying to become a star player, but then there's just these barriers in front of you. I mean, when we look at our big issues within our profession, at least on our industry overview, and we talk about self-worth, we talk about hierarchy, we talk about inefficient process. I mean, what's your perspective on sort of our take on performance potential, dead-end jobs, but then how that sort of impacted, one, your decision professionally, but then also kind of your mindset from where you were 2 years ago to where your mindset is now?
Yeah. So I think, so my first job that I had out in California was very oddly structured. So we technically were employees of Patterson companies, like the equipment dealer. Yeah.
Weird. Okay.
I got hired by Animal Health International, and while I was there, our company got bought out by Patterson. And how that sort of came about is that I talked to Carlo quite a bit about Paul Blackmere. So he was the veterinarian that started, basically he was like very, he a very aggressive businessman back in like the 80s and starting up this milk quality clinic. And what he went to the California dairymen and proposed is basically that they would get all of their veterinary work, all their milk quality, and all of their chemicals they would purchase through him. And so I can't remember who came in first, if it was Walco or another company, but basically like some corporate entity approached him and they basically wanted to buy the business aspect. And they got along with it, these veterinarians and this milk quality lab. And the chemical and drug sale aspect of the clinic kept getting bought by bigger and bigger entities, because once it became part of Walco, then it became part of whomever, and then it became part of Animal Health International, and then eventually Patterson.
Gotcha.
And so this like little clinic kept getting like tacked on to these like larger and larger corporations. And so it was very odd. And when we finally did get purchased by Patterson, some of the like head executives came to visit with me and my boss at the time and like sat us down and talked about, because they wanted to replicate the system. They were like, you guys are making money like hand over fist, like for whatever your inputs are and all that stuff. And so we want to try and duplicate this in other areas, and how do we do that and whatnot and whatever. And so I think at the time, like, especially being that I was a new graduate, I think I probably had both a lot of potential and a lot of
performance.
Performance, because I was still figuring out like even the day-to-day like routine veterinary stuff. I didn't have a lot of
you at least had high potential.
Skills.
Yeah. And
right.
That's the whole idea.
Yep.
You don't have to be like a maximized performance. I mean, you're growing and it's a growth mindset. So even, if you were learning skills, that's fine. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Right. And so they had approached each of us, and my boss at the time had no interest. Her, like ideas and whatever were elsewhere. She had basically hit her brick wall and was looking at like, how could she like move on and grow in the industry? And so her headspace was elsewhere, and they kind of approached me. And at that point I was very overwhelmed, and there was other like just personal life decisions, being so far away from family and all of that. I was like, I feel like I'm getting in over my head, and I just can't. Like, I need to take it back a step.
Yeah.
Take it down a notch.
Well, no, and that's super common. I think, not to completely interrupt your story, but it's like, most employers or most managerial systems are going to be looking who's immediately in front of them. Like, hey, can you take the reins?
Yeah.
Hey, can you, I mean, you're here now. Can you do this? It's just like, because what a recruitment strategy. It's like, it's like we talk about how in the veterinary profession, we often fail twice when it comes to management. Is we have our best performing technician, and that best performing technician is the best you're going to find in what she does. And it's like, hey, you're kind of my right-hand tech. You want to come be an office manager now? Right. And it's like you then take your best technician and you create a void, because that position is now going to be filled by someone else who is potentially less competent. And then you take your best technician, you put him into a position for which they have no training, and then you don't have an education system in place in order to teach them the ropes, essentially. Mm-hmm. So it's like that's why I say we fail twice in many circumstances. So for you to, what do you, and it's, you should take this, and it's like you feel overwhelmed. Like, yeah, that's a substantial amount of responsibility, like that close to being out of school. Similarly, I had a thing where when I was still in veterinary school, there was an issue with one of the humane societies I was actually just doing a 3-week externship at. They had this whole quarantine thing, and it was a big problem. They had to cull a bunch of animals, and basically the veterinarian had quit because they needed a head to roll. And they basically came up to me and they were like, so what are your thoughts about working in a shelter full time? And I'm like, bruh, I am in vet school right now. Like it's actually relatively inappropriate for us to be having this conversation anyway, but yeah, so it's not to completely interject on your story, but it's like that happens a lot, where it's like we're put into these circumstances that we're uncomfortable with, which actually can end up scaring us out the door, and lead to potential missed opportunity.
Yeah. It's sort of like, it's funny because what you're describing is sort of like the Peter principle. It's like the whole idea that like you keep in a corporate system, you keep getting promoted until you reach a level where you're incompetent and can no longer be promoted.
What was the principal's name?
The Peter Principle.
Never heard of that.
You never heard of it?
No. I've simply referred to it as failure of corporatization, where it's like you keep moving up until, like you said, there's a certain level of incompetence what you get there, but then you want to keep your job. So you essentially end up having less competent people under you to make your performance look better. So that's a pretty common corporate environment. And that's why we're so adamant about focusing on our education system and having our corporate tiers not on hierarchy, but on support. So for us, it's administration is below, supporting the employees above. So Peter system.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So here, I'll read it to you. The Peter Principle is a concept in management developed by Lawrence J. Peter, which observes that people in a hierarchy tend to rise to their level of incompetence. Mm-hmm. An employee is promoted based on their success in a previous job until they reach a level at which they are no longer competent, as the skill in one job does not necessarily translate to another.
Oh my God. I don't have to say we failed twice anymore. I can say it's the Peter Principle.
You can just say it's the Peter Principle. Yeah.
See, I love that. I love when I say something that I'm like, well, clearly this is what it is. And then like, well, now this is the first time, Caroline, you've had that opportunity. But a lot of times Ben is like, hey, they have a whole book on that. And I'm like, awesome.
I mean, there is a book on it.
Yeah. So there we go. Caroline, you get your first, there's a book on that.
I love
it.
Yay. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've actually talked to my mom about that a couple times too. In that she's a very potent producer, not a good manager, but she's been in her position so long that they want her to be in management constantly, and she keeps having to tell them no.
Yeah,
because it's like, no, I'm not good at that at all. Yeah. I will exclusively fail. Yeah. And I don't train that well, or whatever, or whatever it might be. It's just like, why do that?
Yeah. Well, that's the carrot on the stick. It's the carrot on the stick. So your mom simply isn't following the carrot,
right?
But for us, it's like, when we have the Peter Principle apply to a veterinary clinic, right, or a veterinary setting where we already know we're underpaying most of our staff, and it's like, hey, if you move into management, the carrot on the stick is you're going to make X dollars more, you're going to have potential benefits or whatever it is. So there's a high incentive for staff to move out of their comfort zone into an uncomfortable, or what you have identified as an incompetent place. Mm-hmm. The main difference for us in our organization is that if that scenario occurs, we have an entire system to support that employee.
Right.
So it's we won't necessarily allow a level of sustained incompetence, because what we're talking about is when you move into a new position, you're a problem child. It's high performance. It's a high potential, low performance. For us, we just have a constant feedback system, between 515s and traction to our twice a year reviews, basically, so we don't perpetuate the Peter system in that capacity. So, but carry on.
Actually, that kind of plays right into the thing. So as you were telling your story, I was kind of drawing out a continuation of what we were talking about on the last podcast. So we talked about this, how basically employers set you up for situations similar to the one that you had described in ending up in dead end jobs, and how you hire people based on potential, but then, you want to push them up in performance. But situations like your story and the looks like the concept of this Peter Principle, what those do is generates a system that creates dead-end jobs. And what we mean by that is, if you think so, potential on the x-axis, performance on the y-axis, there's a wall on the potential side. So basically you can't get up into star player status because of antiquated business practices and a lack of infrastructure. So you might have a ton of potential, but you actually don't have the capacity based on the environment that you are in to realize said potential. So you can be the potential silver bullet, but you're never going to actually be able to realize it because of those two variables. All right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's actually what we're kind of referring to. So we have people that know, in a lot of cases, they have a high level of potential, but they can't realize it. And that ultimately, starts to limit their performance. But let's say that they can, they stick it out and they become a solid backbone. Well, now you're in low potential, high performance. And then you've got all these other variables of disparagement, hierarchy, deteriorating skill sets, a failed bond spectrum alignment, a loss of self-worth, as kind of, we refer to it as the boot on top of your head that's pushing you down into being an iceberg. So not only can you utilize your own potential, but now you're being pushed down and down and down. And I think that's where this Peter principle comes in, because you see the hierarchy as the thing that's pushing you down. But if you can climb it, you might be able to maintain a high level of performance because you are a high potential type person, but you're never actually going to be a star player. It's I'm literally just having this thought now.
In real time.
In real time, yes.
But no, you're exactly right. So you have this boot, and everyone defines the boot a different way, like you said, between disparagement and kind of these other things. But it's then a matter of saying on that backbone, backbone comes back to a matter of fulfillment.
Yes.
So you have these boots that are pushing you down, and I think one of the examples we had used on well, at this point it's gonna be last week's podcast. One of it is when you start to move things over to the numbers. So one of the big boots when you have a backbone who is fulfilled in their job, for us as veterinarians, a massive boot is if you start to move into one of these corporate settings where it's like, what's your numbers? What's your, what are you generating? What's your production? Oh my God, now you're a negative accrual. It's like you can actually take these actually fulfilled backbones, and as we start to lose culture, core value, but also purpose, incentive, then you're going to start to lose fulfillment. So you're actually kicking your backbones over into kind of having these dead end jobs, and then you just completely demolish their performance into icebergs when you take away their purpose. So like that's the boot. It's like a kick and a stomp, where you get them sort of in that setting. So so that's, I think, a little bit of elaboration on that principle.
Another thing you can add into that too is there are three primary philosophical ideas about how people gain fulfillment in their life. The one that we focus on is purpose. I think that's the most effective one. But that's Nietzsche. There's Freud, who is the pursuit of pleasure, and then I don't remember the other guy's name. But it's the pursuit of power. So it's the three P's of gaining fulfillment in life. So actually, that's what you're referring to. Is it's a shift in dynamic, because I think inherently in the environment that we operate in, we tend to the veterinary profession tends to attract more altruistic people. It tends to attract more people focused, friendly. If you listen to the one where we go through the tricore, it's the high IS people, high altruism, high empathy, tend to be a little bit heavier on the softer traits. That's going to push for fulfillment in purpose and pleasure, not necessarily power, but really heavy on purpose. So our industry is going to focus pretty heavily on that. The traditional practice setup back before it started to crumble probably maximized on that pretty heavily. On the altruism and just like that you gain purpose in fulfillments in this setting, one-to-one relationships with caregivers, right? Like
it was substantially before money became the talk.
Right.
Because
it never came into the discussion.
It was at that point.
It's your James Harriet.
Yes, correct.
Basically.
Yes. Yeah. And plus, even for those small animal practices, it was still top bonded. Right. So you still were already focusing on the top 20% of clientele, but culturally, it wasn't anything other than that.
Right, that's all you had.
Yeah, because culturally, the people who fell into not the top 20% weren't going to the vet anyway.
Yeah.
So it's now we've bled into saying, well, culturally, we don't have the top 20%. Culturally, we have the top 80%, but we still have a business that is focusing on the top 20%.
Right.
So then that gap of 60% essentially is now the reason why we're starting to lose altruism, or not that we're losing altruism, but that our altruism is starting to get kicked and stomped.
Right. It's just the focus isn't isn't on it anymore.
Correct.
And that's, I think that's what the corporatization does, is it focuses you away from purpose, and it focuses you onto the other two of pleasure. So basically individual, compensation,
money,
right?
Yeah.
And then power is climbing hierarchy, is actually becoming the boot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
When in fact it goes against, I think, what a lot of us are hardwired into, and that's why that's, I think it was actually in the video that is going up tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
And actually tomorrow, for everyone that's listening to this, was last Wednesday, but
We're in the future.
And we talked about how corporate medicine really just doesn't have a place, and that's why.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I think, I for as much as we sort of kind of speak ill of sort of the corporate culture, corporate model, sort of what it is and how we feel it has no place in the veterinary profession, I say that, and I just only want to clarify this one point, is that is not to disparage those veterinarians who currently work in corporate medicine. That is not the point of the conversation, because I only want to say that because I think we have the opportunity to make veterinarians and veterinary professionals feel as if they are disparaged if they work in those environments. They're simply a casualty of the war.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yep.
And we say
And Carlo, you had mentioned this to me when we were talking on the phone the other day. You were like, you don't have to achieve your purpose through your job. Like,
sure,
you can work in corporate, and you can,
find it
basically enjoy your job enough that you fulfill your purpose elsewhere, whether that be raising a family or, extracurriculars or whatever you're doing outside of your job. Like, go become a yoga instructor and then work your regular 8 to 5 job. I guess I don't know if it means you become an iceberg basically, but there shouldn't be
you can do that as a backbone status for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it actually at any level.
Yeah, because you're not losing fulfillment.
Right.
You're just not gaining fulfillment from your job.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's actually, unfulfilled might not even be the best word, but it's actually like a removal.
Sure.
So there's definitely the neutral status of being,
kind of like
unfulfilled, but is it a positive fulfillment or a negative?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So, my wife, although she is nowhere near the veterinary industry, is a pretty good example where, she goes to work, she works part-time, but life's fulfillment for her does not come from work.
There you go.
So
right.
And that's the altruistic nature of, I think, your veterinary professionals in this industry is it's the flip.
Yeah.
So which not to say your wife should be having altruism about the profession or job in which she has. It's not a judgment of saying because she doesn't have it. It just is. And like you had said it before, it trends towards altruism in the veterinary industry. Yeah. It's just we have so many different barriers to kick and stomp it out of us.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you talk about what are your numbers, right?
Right. That's the end of that job.
Less than 10% of people, as a gut reaction, that I've seen assessments on across all levels and positions within our company, are economically motivated.
Sure.
I am the minority.
Yeah.
Yes.
Big time.
Yep.
I think mine was it was low between economic and I can't remember if it's
political.
Power or political.
Yeah.
Those were my two lowest.
Yeah.
Let's look. Yeah. I do have it.
They
up.
were basically negligent at that, or they were. Yeah.
So someone can have a 0. Caroline somehow got into the negative.
Right. Yeah.
But honestly, I think having just to remind everyone, the economic indicator is basically return on investment.
Yep.
So that might actually be one of, I don't want to say barrier, but that in some capacity could end up being a barrier to entrepreneurial mindset. Yep. Is that you may not actually find the value of investing yourself and time into a new idea because you're not driven for the return.
Right.
So, so that may actually be kind of when we were in the clinic, was it yesterday? I said, where you are gearing towards sort of this tier 4, and when it comes time that I have to teach you traction or whatever else,
I was like, oh, I get to learn something.
Yes. Yeah. And basically the conversation ended with, you have to get out of your own way. at least in some regard. It very well may be trying to flex that muscle on just understanding, and I think what it's going to help with is starting to recognize being in that dead end job, being in a position in which you are unfulfilled, that may actually drive you more towards having a higher economic motivator with the proper mentorship. Meaning if you don't have a high economic motivator and you're stuck in a dead end job, it may be, the recommendation is just trying to run to another problem, but with proper mentorship, it's not you running to a problem, you're running towards a solution.
The way that I've worded that in the past is when you have a low motivator, what it will typically be is, especially for economic, I will seek a return on investment if it will feed one of my high motivators. So for you, Caroline, being higher aesthetic, higher individualistic, massively high theoretical, and then also higher on altruism, if those are being detracted, it is possible that you will actually inflate temporarily that desire for a return because you're feeling a removal of investment, essentially, in that you're putting your time in to feed your higher motivators, and it's being basically manipulated and taken away from you. So you can actually engage low motivators when necessary. Again, we're dynamic people. But it's typically in the event that you need to reestablish the boundaries to maintain the things that do actually motivate you.
Yeah. I think it's to some extent, because Carlo you were talking about this with Katie, where like Katie basically went in and was like pitching all these ideas for things and trying to make changes and suggestions and whatever, and just not even shot down, but just like flat out ignored.
Yeah. You don't know because you're not an owner.
Right. And that's kind of the same deal with me too. And I think that's where the frustration comes in, because like Ben said, I'm trying to feed some of those my other motivators, and I'm not getting any acknowledgement or any return on my investment. And so it's like, why am I even bothering kind of thing?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Well, and you also have a unique pattern of variables as well, where you're an IC behavioral pattern, like myself. You're a 98 out of 100 theoretical, so always asking why, always seeking to learn.
Well, that makes sense.
No.
I wish I had known that like 3 months ago. No, I'm just kidding.
What?
I'm just kidding.
You should have known that like 2 years ago.
No, I'm just kidding.
He's just remembering.
Yes.
You actually lead with practical thinking, although you do have all three that are above 7, so they're all definitely there. It's just that's the top one. But the one that is actually the kicker in this instance is you have a very high number on role awareness. So what that means is that the guidelines to success for you appreciate and in a lot of times require a high level of specificity in how to succeed. So like you are one that would appreciate a very long job description. Somebody that is low on role awareness is going to be like, give me the 2 or 3 things you want me to do. I'll go ahead and just figure it out. Different people, tend to look at those things different ways. So when you pair that with high theoretical as well as a high C, which is again attention to detail or level of critical nature, a lot of times what that's going to be is, especially in an environment of limited role awareness. So if you're given a set of variables that's A, B, C, D, here's how you succeed, you're going to continue to ask why, or am I succeeding? Because you're going to be very critical of the situation. You're just naturally curious, and you don't really have the full level of definition in your path to success. So you have to create it yourself, which creates that self-dialogue that you've been talking about, with us on and off on the podcast here, of like, am I actually doing it type thing, right?
Right, yeah.
Yep.
And I would say that larger corporate environments, or I should say just different environments. It doesn't necessarily matter how they come about, but some environments will be able to feed different variables different ways. I don't know if you'll ever find a scenario that's going to ever quell, that type of a pattern to the point where it's where you're just comfortable and stable. That is something that you have to acknowledge the strengths of that, because there are some major strengths in that pattern. You are constantly self-analyzing and seeking to improve, but that also comes with you're constantly analyzing.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a paralysis by analysis potential.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Paralysis by analysis. I have that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing that plays into that is, depending on how well you handle that can be something that is a very stressful set of variables as well, which would push you more into your adaptive, which pushes your S way down. So not only are you stressed out, you also start to feel frantic.
Oh, okay.
So did you want to bring this Tricor to your next therapy session?
Possibly. Actually, what's funny is I did email it to my last therapist, but I don't know if she understood half of it.
Probably not.
So probably not. Yeah.
Yeah. Ben does a good job of the interconnectedness of all those items.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting because I like that franticness. I can pinpoint that moment almost exactly. And it's like when I'm at the clinic and 3 different people are asking me something at the same time, and I have to go, hang on, and then I go in the other room. Like I do like a literal and just I have to put my head down and just start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I get really frustrated if people try to interrupt that process, because I have to like take it back down a notch where I can get back to a level where I'm like functioning again.
Yeah, but that's actually I was going to say, but that's not exclusively something that is your fault. I mean, we have been attempting to teach and maintain triage process so that when a doctor comes out of an education room, and we have to at least, because it actually kind of stemmed from me. Like if I cross through like 2 different door thresholds, there's going to be a good chance I'm going to be nearing forgetting what I just talked about. So then it's met with like a slam of like 4 different questions, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this. It's like, bro, like let me get my stuff on paper before you start talking. Yeah. And if there's someone standing at our bar, which is kind of our triage bar where we have patient clipboards, if someone's just randomly standing there, I'm like, what are you doing in my space? Like, get out of here, scoot over. There's no reason for you to be here. Now I have to engage you, and I'm going to definitely forget what I just was doing, which truthfully is then what birthed our green sheets and our blue sheets and our yellow sheets, is making notations while you're in the room with the people before you leave, so that you can, first of all, track your own informed consent when you have to type records a few hours later, but then also make sure you don't miss something when you get back into central triage. So yes, Caroline, I guess in one respect, it's me apologizing and just saying, I'm sorry that you're experiencing that, but it's not particular. We acknowledge it's a problem. It's just not by design.
Well, yeah. And I would say that we've all been operating at like 150% capacity lately. So I think it's just like for the level of stress in the system, you're gonna have those moments. And actually, I feel like we cope fairly well.
Yes.
So
yes.
and me yesterday at like coming back to GP practice and having it like implode on a Monday, because I'm superstitious. So the whole full moon, Friday the 13th, like that whole thing, I totally, I buy into that. But yesterday was like a prime example of that. And again, I feel like because I almost get like, before my like head pops off my body and starts like, exorcism, like spinning around, it like energizes me briefly, and I get like a little like boost of speed.
Now you're getting the addiction, Caroline.
Yeah. It can be kind of frustrating too, because your mind works faster than your body, and so you're trying to execute tasks at like like a level that you're like, but I just wish I could write faster, or I just wish I could run faster.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. See, and then and then you meet that with our model of having 1 to 6. So it's 1 veterinarian to 6 medical support staff.
Yep.
You know, that's the ultimate goal for us, not including clerical staff, because actually the clerical process is almost entirely independent of the veterinary team. I mean, really, making sure patients coming and checking out, so on and so forth. But at least as far as like the medical direction that a veterinarian needs to provide, that's how you start running faster. And then the addiction gets worse, where you're like, oh man, I just ran through 30 cases in that 10-hour time period. That felt fantastic. Right. Yeah. Can I make it 35? Yeah. You know, and we're talking not a numbers game on quantity. We're talking about maintaining a high level of quality with the quantity. That's the addiction.
Correct.
Right. Because if you, and this is where
it's how many plates can you keep spinning in the air at the same time?
100%. Yes, yes, that's exactly what it is, and that's the fun part. That's why, again, for us, we're scaling up the way that we are, and again, we have to get the diagram online. I did take a picture of it, and I will develop it, but
it'll be up.
It will be. Is the quantity and quality grid on the quantity and quality grid. One of the things that I identified is if that you are in a practice where it is relatively low quality and relatively low quantity, the first thing you want to do is get your quality high. You don't want to take on additional quantity until quality goes up, because when you have a high level of quality, you have a natural growth process where quantity is going to increase. Unmarketed, non-engaged growth is going to happen as quality goes up. So if you look at the model where it's like, okay, quality goes up and then quantity starts to increase, your quality is naturally going to drop simply because quantity is increasing naturally. You're not trying to, you're just seeing more cases because you're doing a better job. That's basically been our model, is saying that as quantity goes up, I'm already planning on quality coming down. So all we have to do is just plan to increase and maintain quality once quantity increases. So that's the design that you are essentially seeing and working in, Caroline, is like, yes, we want to get to that addiction point where it's like, oh my God, I just ran through like 30 high quality cases in a 10-hour time period. And it's I can't think about anything else other than going back to work because that was awesome, you know. You know, so that's that.
That plays almost directly into kind of where this started too, because that's what that feeding, that desire is just fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Like to be able to do that, to fulfill high quantity and high quality for many, many people across many types of values too, right?
Sure.
Can be very, very fulfilling. There's actually not much. I mean, it probably hits 5 of them where I know it hits aesthetic, right? Because you created harmony, right? In medical care. It hits economic because you're really just hammering out numbers. It hits theoretical because you're seeing a higher caseload and you're learning more. Like it hits a lot of different stuff.
And they're complicated cases. It's not like it's anywhere from like, you know, geriatric pets with multiple chronic diseases to like laceration repair.
Right.
So it's
So I guess let me let me just kind of twist that just a little bit. So you had a Monday explosion not in our setting, in a different practice, to then say, okay, look at how we ran out like Saturday. Like Saturday for you and Katie was absolute bonkers. But can you compare sort of those two things, like your crazy Monday versus the crazy Saturday? So Monday in a different clinic, Saturday in our clinic. Would you be able to draw some type of correlation between the amount of cases that we saw to the, you know, the quality or sort of the engagement? Or, I mean, what was your perspective on those two different settings?
Well, it was definitely interesting trying to like integrate some of the like PAW, like the spinning plates into like a very structured system. And not that our system isn't structured, but it's all triage based. And in a typical GP practice, it's all appointment time based.
So
go ahead.
So
So the part of the difficulty with that is that like the person that's making the decisions for how much time you have to work with this critically ill patient is all based off of what the owner says on the phone when they call and how much time the receptionist chooses to give you.
Yeah,
the
sure.
doctor plays no part in that triage order.
Sure. Yep.
And so I got kind of lucky yesterday because one of my very critically ill patients that I was managing came in just before lunch. And so I had extra time to like bleed over into the lunch period. But it meant that like my technician who was supposed to have her break and her lunch didn't get her full lunch break. And so, obviously
you did just break Ben's brain, by the way.
Yeah. Can we go back?
Ben's like rubbing his eyes and head. He's just like, and I'm just shaking my head at him. Yes.
So context, this is Caroline, you're already aware of this, but for those that are listening or watching, I have zero experience in other veterinary clinics.
Yeah.
So you're like, that's why I acknowledge not only have I fully consumed all the Kool-Aid, right. I've also learned how to brew it, and I'm trying to get it to other people.
Right.
You're making kombucha now?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, kombucha, right.
So can you explain that triage and scheduling process one more time for me? Because I'm really confused.
Yeah. So this is to interject there real quick. Ben, I just want you to understand that this is how it is everywhere else. So Caroline, continue. Go ahead.
So, I mean, in like a typical GP setting, it's all appointment based. So people like similar to like your doctor's office, I guess, because at your like normal GP doctor's office, if you call and say, I would like to schedule my physical with my doctor at X time, you go in, you get there at your time. They usually still see you like 20 minutes late, but whatever. And then if it's something more complicated or requires more testing, they're like, oh, you need to go to urgent care. You need to go to the ER. You need to go to wherever, where it then becomes triage based.
Right.
But instead, like in vet med, in a GP, it's like you're still trying to adhere to this schedule. And so when people call in and they make appointments for things, the receptionists, the people working up front, so we would call them caregiver support staff.
Yep.
They take the call and the caregiver says, oh, I have like my cat's been vomiting. Mm-hmm. And the receptionist then like they do have some like
some guidelines. It's like, oh, I'm gonna give you 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like ours is like it's like staggered. So you have like vaccine appointments that are staggered in with what we call sick appointments. Mm-hmm. So like some of the time blocks are longer than others, but they basically like decide, oh, the patient's vomiting, so maybe the doctor will want to do x-rays. So we'll give them like 40 minutes.
Okay,
and that's all on the phone call pre-consultation, non-present.
Correct. Yeah. So like me as the doctor, I come in on Monday morning and I read through my schedule and I do try to read through the histories, but all I have to go off of is like you on the board, you with like when you're up front and you type in those little notes in the box that says like why the patient is presenting today. Mm-hmm. That's what I go off of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the case that I had yesterday was a very ill cat who was having difficulty breathing. And I think they had blocked me like maybe 40 minutes just before lunch.
Right.
And
which could span anything from an upper respiratory infection to congestive heart failure to pleural effusion.
Correct.
Like, because it's again solely based upon the perception of the person who is making the call and the understanding of the person receiving the call. In many circumstances, neither individuals have any medical information like training.
And that's why telemedicine will never work in veterinary medicine.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can't ask the cat like, how sick are you?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So that's standard, though.
Yeah, that's practically. I mean, with maybe a slight variation from one clinic to the next.
Your referral centers probably don't operate like that for the most part.
No, well, I would say they even may swing a little bit into that direction. And that's actually one of the big issues with a lot of your internists. Yep. So a lot of your referral centers will have one or two, rarely above two internists, and so the internists want to. And I wouldn't say surgeons as well. I'm not just singling out internists. That's more common. is they'll have their scheduled appointments. Oh, I've had this cat for IBS who's been scheduled for 3 weeks, and then emergency brings in another patient overnight who needs an internal med consultation. So then that overnight patient that was hospitalized by ER now has the expectation of an internal med consult the following day, who may be booked up with appointments from the last 3 weeks on scheduled stuff. So I wouldn't even go as far as to say that in referral settings, you have exclusively a triage basis outside of the emergency rotations, because then it's a hybrid of both a scheduled environment and a walk-in environment or triage environment, which still overlap when you get to one of the other services. So but still it's a perpetuation of an old style of medicine. It's or old
antiquated business practices.
Antiquated business practices.
So all right, so we're gonna take this specific set of variables and we're gonna go back to the graph that you have to make 2 graphs now.
I gotta make 2 graphs. Okay.
Because all right. So Caroline, we're gonna just give you the benefit of you are a high potential veterinarian. Yes. All right, you might not believe it some days. Your high C, high role awareness thing might tell you otherwise, but we believe in it. So, what was that?
I said thanks.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
I thought she said Ben.
I totally heard Ben too.
Okay. Like shit, you're gonna reprimand him,
right?
No, if I was going to reprimand him, I would say,
nope, don't do that.
Yep. You don't say that.
Yeah, you don't say that. So what you have is, in this instance, a wall limiting your potential of an antiquated business practice, right?
Yeah.
So you're at best going to be a backbone to a system that doesn't work great.
Right.
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 Okay.
It's a fair to good system.
Yeah, fair to good.
Yes.
Right. Good being top of
at
the
best.
At the best. And now you pair that with an environment that is doesn't really have the support system to fulfill shared purpose and well-being. So you have somebody like yourself, Caroline, where you're a little bit more predisposed to kind of that the mental anguish of being a veterinarian.
Yeah, sure.
So just because of the variables that we had talked about in your TriCore, there you have a general possibility that is higher than others to feel a loss of self-worth. I think that pairs pretty much directly with the imposter syndrome thing that we've talked about. A number of different things. So just in those 2 things, you've already just boxed yourself into hopefully being a backbone, if not just being an iceberg, because of things that to a point are out of your control.
Right.
So then what's the solution?
Right.
Get control.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
And that's where the return on investment part comes in.
Yes.
Like when you try to change things and gain some control and it gets thrown in your face, then you're like, well, fuck.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, and it's and then it's like, even, and that's why I said I think the movement of someone who has sort of that low economic to move into being high economic, it needs to be coached or mentored, only because like it's like, well, if you are sort of knocked off of a investment, meaning like you are really trying, like you're going outside of your bubble and you're like, what, I'm going to try, and I'm going to really try to invest in this thing. Cause I have that altruism and I want to do this. I'm not comfortable doing it. I'm going to overanalyze absolutely everything, but I'm going to go out on my own on this one and I'm going to do it. And then it's, you're either boxed in, you're kicked over, pushed down, it fails, whatever it is. And it's like, see, that's why I don't do these things.
Yeah, right.
But in that capacity may have been a failure simply because the expenditure of energy or the investment wasn't actually in the right idea. It wasn't in the right thing. And that's why I think to take someone who has sort of a low economic and coach them into a high economic, it's like all we're doing, we're like the mentors are like the financial advisors. where it's like, let me just show you where to sort of bet your chips. Let me show you where to invest. That way there's a greater probability of success. But again, coming back to it, you have to make sure that you have already identified your goals. And essentially, in our context, goals essentially are going to be purpose. And do we have shared purpose? And do we have shared well-being? And saying, all right, well, if we've identified what that purpose is, and then
we dropped Caroline's call. Yeah, just go ahead and grab it.
Okay.
Good old technology.
Oh, dang. That was pretty good, too. Where'd we lose it, Caroline? Oh, hold on.
Hold on. We got to get on the Bluetooth, again.
Here.
Oh, boy.
I can sort of hear you.
Yeah, there we go. Where'd we lose you?
I don't know.
That's fine.
Basically, I mean, and we'll just have to chop it in wherever. But I mean, basically, the context is that if, to coach out of, being someone who it's not a natural tendency to invest into something because, you're not, it's not a main motivator for you as an economic motivator, is that if you invest in something incorrectly and it ends up being a failure, then you're not going to want to invest in things in the future. It's like, see, I told you I shouldn't have done that. I went outside of my comfort zone and I overthought and analyzed this, but I took a risk and it failed. But that's where essentially that's where the goal comes into it. Is that, are you calling me again, Caroline?
No.
Oh, weird. Let's see, I'm getting another call from you. So that's where the goals come into it, is that the goal component basically drives your failures. So it's the goals in stone and the plans in sand. So it's as someone who's mentoring someone to develop the economic motivator, we basically say, let's set our goal of shared purpose and shared well-being. Let's make sure in the distance, our long tier 4, way out there, that's where we want to go with this. But because you're going to struggle with investing in an idea or having an economic motivator and saying, all right, there's going to be some failures along the way. Some stuff isn't going to go according to plan, but that doesn't mean that we aren't working towards the goal. And that's why I think when you look at coaching someone with a low economic motivator, that's what needs to be emphasized. And it comes back to everything we keep saying over and over and over again. It's being comfortable with failure. And when you become more and more and more comfortable with failure, the idea of having a high economic motivator, meaning you're investing in something, it actually becomes you're more willing to strategize, you're more willing to take the risk, you're more willing to sort of invest in something that might fail, because the only way you're going to get towards your goal is if you fail on a plan. That's it. So that's when I think when I look at someone who has a low economic motivator, it's going to be very tough to jump over into the investment side. But that's, I guess, my story, is that I made the jump to invest in myself entirely. That's one of the main stories of PAW. I'm like, no one has ever done this before, to my knowledge, to this capacity with these ideas and what it was. But I was just willing to double down on the economic. I was willing to double down on the investment. And that's where, like I said, coaching someone from a low economic into a high economic, we just have to make sure that there is a realized plan. A realized goal. Sorry.
So and I'm actually going to challenge your wording on that a little bit. Not that you're thinking in the wrong light, but it's more about the alignment of understanding what your values are. So for us, we are able to utilize a high level of motivation for all 7 types of values, because we all have one shared purpose.
I agree.
Right. I agree. So for somebody that is low economic, why would I invest my time, life, money, whatever it might be into this business, right?
Yeah.
To serve the patient.
Right.
That's why. To serve the patient hits all 7, depending on how you look at it.
True.
So if I lead all political, and it's like I personally believe that I have a ton of great ideas on how to make this happen, and now I'm going to seek a structure that, if it's all about serve the patient, that's growth mindset. That's constant forward.
Absolutely.
So new ideas should be welcomed with open arms and challenged appropriately. If it's all aesthetic, you're creating a scenario of a high level of harmony within case management. I mean, to to be able to do triage as an art form would be something that can really engage somebody at a high aesthetic level. I could do this for all of them.
Of course.
It's not necessarily about, like, don't get me wrong, economic is something that I think people do need to value because they need to understand the concept of ROI. And the fact that if you're listening to this and you feel like you're hitting a dead end, like you probably are, because you're not actually obtaining any more return on the investment of your time. Remember, every day you show up to work, you're selling your time to your employer. If you are not obtaining a return on that, you need to go find something else to do or to do the same thing somewhere else.
And I think what both of you are trying to say is that we as a veterinary profession, and being very altruistic and having very low self-worth collectively, we aren't taught and aren't allowed to value ourselves.
Correct.
And so, like, the whole, like, return on investment and, like, having an economic value, it's like, at a minimum, you should at least value yourself and your ideas and realize that, like,
like, we are in financial debt. We are in financial debt, and we are in cultural debt. We are in individual debt. We don't have anything to invest. Right? That, I mean, how many veterinarians have we talked to? Oh, I have all this debt load. I can't buy a practice. Nope, that's wrong. I have low self-worth. I can't invest in culture. Nope, that's wrong. And it's like, no, you have the ability, like the opportunity for investment is there. And you're exactly right, Caroline. I think for what it is in our industry overview, you've hit the nail on the head. Is we just are of the mindset that we don't have anything to bring to the table, when it is exactly the opposite. That was actually one of the last things that I had spoke with Ashley about before she had left at the end of her externship. She was like, I'm kind of looking at this practice, and there may be a buy-in potential, and so on and so forth. And her question was, she's like, how do I, sort of show that I am worthy enough? How do I show that I am worthy of investing into this practice? Or I'm willing to be partner. And I said, no. You are the greatest asset to bring. They should be so lucky as to have you as a part of their ownership structure. I said, you are the valuable one. That's, you're exactly right. Is we're just not culturally or financially or politically or whatever it is in a world or a profession or an industry in which we are taught that we have value. And that's the kick in the stomp of the boot to go from sort of your fulfilled to unfulfilled backbone.
Well, right, because if you see an environment in front of you where, even if you don't have the words, but you see the writing on the wall that it's going to push me into being an iceberg. Does that sound like you have a lot of value?
No.
I have the potential to be a star, yet the situation around me is going to make me an iceberg. Well, I have no value then. Right? Like, there's nothing I can do. I'm now powerless. And then what does that push us into? Drama dynamic. Right? And then it's just, and that only makes the problem child, iceberg, dynamic worse. So, like, we say it all the time, that all of these variables interconnect.
There's a ridiculous interconnectivity,
but because it all interconnects, like everything that's in here, and that's why having these high level solutions is so important, because you have to kind of think about this from a 30,000 foot view and understand how these variables are pushing us into this box of a lack of fulfillment, a destruction of self-worth, a destruction of soft and hard skills, failed bond spectrum, this concept of the Marriott practice still driving the industry, even though we have 80% of a market that could easily feed in an entire clinic, right? I mean, multiple in every area. You've got all of these variables, and yet we have these kids that are coming out of school, and all they see is a direct path into being an iceberg. Because the traditional business practice, traditional practice doesn't have the infrastructure for them to realize their potential. And again, they might not have the words for it, but the writing's on the wall. And then they see this massive corporate hierarchy that it's either, I'm either going to climb this, or I'm going to be the guy that has to take the first free exam for the next 5 years. And that's going to be great. But then my numbers are going to suck and they're going to hate me for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying you're offering door number 3?
We are.
Yes.
We are the third door, Caroline.
Take door number 3.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, we've referred to it as the PAW way.
Yes.
So it's industry, tradition, corporate, and then the PAW way.
Yes.
Yep. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, I just like soapboxed really hard.
Yeah, that was pretty good. That was a good out.
So yeah, we'll kind of free willy it a little bit next time as well. But
yeah, there might actually be an opportunity though. I think as we move through the star chart, even potentially getting ongoing input with Caroline, because Caroline's actually going to be out of the clinic for a little bit. We got a few mentees rolling through. Yeah. But I know it's like super cry.
I think isn't the next time that you're in the clinic when the new spots open, Caroline?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we are like racing to the finish line on this.
40 days.
Yeah, yep. Yep. I know. And it's between
scary.
Yeah, I know, yeah. So we're actually we're what, 5-ish podcasts away. I mean, it depends on when our recording table shows up. But yeah, we're close. We're within a season of being where we need to be. So
yes.
But anyway, yeah, Carolina, good Tuesday.
Yes.
Do you want to, even though it was a failed intro, do you want to crack a hand at the sort of exit here?
Sure, why not?
All right, hit it.
So thanks for joining us on the roller coaster ride that was this Tuesdays with Caroline, and we'll see you next time.
Nice.
Thanks,
all right, guys,
Caroline.
we'll see you next time.